don't know if you have to hit record again. There we go. Well, it's good to be with you all. My name is Michael Adkins, and I'm honored to be here at Anika Prather's invite. She's a dear friend, and I'm excited to present to you today. I hail from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm the director of academics and a teacher at St. Agnes School in St. Paul. And I'm going to be presenting a brief reflection today on liberal education and the relationship between it and a free and ordered society through the writings of W.E.B. Du Bois and Joseph Pieper. First, before I get into the reflection, a little bit about our two key authors that will lead our discussion. Joseph Pieper was born in 1904 and died in 1997. He was a German Catholic philosopher. He was a Thomist, meaning that he was part of the resurgence and renewal in the thought and interest in the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas, who was a very, you could say, classical thinker and a universal thinker, and brought a lot of diverse minds together in his thought, from ancient Greeks and Romans to Muslims to other philosophers. He brought them all together in his Catholic theology and philosophy. Joseph Pieper wrote on education, culture, and virtue. And the work I'm kind of riffing off of today is his 1948 work, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And he wrote this book in response after the Second World War, obviously was a disaster for Germany on many levels. And he was a faithful Christian, and his hope was to renew German society and culture back to its roots. And this was his thesis, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Our other author who inspires my reflection today is W.E.B. Du Bois, who was born in 1868 and died in 1963. He's an African-American intellectual, sociologist, historian, and advocate for the classical liberal arts, famous with his debate with Booker T. Washington. And he was a civil rights activist. And the quote and primary quote and text I'm working from is his 1903 work, The Talented Tenth. So, liberal education and a free and ordered society. W.E.B. Du Bois, celebrated African-American author, historian, and civil rights activist, famously wrote, quote, "I insist that the object of all true education is not to make men carpenters, it is to make carpenters men." And let me repeat that. It's so important. I insist that the object of all true education is to not make men carpenters, it is to make carpenters men. Unlike Du Bois, most Americans today believe that education is the acquisition of knowledge and skills for the sake of getting a job or economic gain. In fact, the American educational system has largely been rebuilt upon these assumptions for over a century. Jobs provide individuals with income to live comfortably. The goal, then, is to acquire a position that provides ample income, disposable wealth, to experience pleasure and to avoid pain. This progressive notion of education has worked for a time. I would argue its lifespan extended largely thanks to a durable but declining Christian cultural capital, but has shown in recent years to be inadequate to fulfill the needs of the whole person and society. One can see the inadequacies of contemporary education unraveling in real time as concerned parents and teachers battle administrations, superintendents, and boards of education over ideological agendas about, for example, the human person, morals, and American history content. Such conflicts cut to the heart of what American and Western society is and means. These debates, frequently reported in the press, uncover a sort of identity crisis. Some great minds forecast this crisis in the first half of the 20th century. For example, such prophets as W.E.B. Du Bois, and I would argue too, Joseph Pieper, predicting that an aging utilitarian model of education is ill-equipped to sustain a society and its values. In contrast, our educational heritage offers a vastly different account of utility. Education is about fulfilling one's nature, human happiness, and passing on a society's most important ideals and values from generation to generation. The current identity crisis in America provides a clarifying context to revisit the perennial question, what is the relationship between education and a free and ordered society? In order to address this question, it's important to define our terms. What is education? Du Bois' words at the opening of this presentation are challenging, especially to pioneering and pragmatic Americans. To begin, he speaks of, quote, true education, implying that there is a counterfeit alternative. The term education is a compound of two Latin words, the prefix e, from the preposition a or x, meaning out of, and the verb ducere, meaning to lead. Thus, the word education itself is instructive. It means to lead a person out of his or her childish self into a greater and more mature vision of reality. For Du Bois, the counterfeit notion of education does no such thing as the student is not changed. Instead, this approach only molds the child into a wage earner, one whose life existence and happiness are evaluated almost exclusively on an economic level. As an African American, Du Bois knew intimately that such an education is in fact no education. Rather, it is merely the road to a different kind of serfdom and slavery, serving a new master. Du Bois knew that African Americans post-emancipation needed more than just jobs to earn wages. Their dignity demanded an education that truly liberates and ennobles. A free society or servitude. Du Bois' writings about true education also challenges modern Americans to ponder what a free society really is. Is not a carpenter already a man? The great thinker's words clearly indicate that a human person needs more to actualize his or her potential and flourish as a created being. Americans are known the world over to be hard workers, to put in many hours, and to be rugged individuals who, quote unquote, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get the job done. Yet, if we spend most of our lives working in order to consume products, are we really free? In his important and timeless work, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, Joseph Pieper battles against the modern error of valuing only that work which results in economic gain. He argues that the modern world is marked by, quote, total labor, and that the original meaning behind leisure and liberal arts has been largely lost, subjugated by the servile arts of economic servitude. Pieper notes that the concept of leisure originates in the Aristotelian model, and he points the reader back to those roots, even highlighting that the Greek and Latin words for, quote, the daily toil of life were ascolia and neg otium, quote unquote, to be unleisurely. Therefore, the worker is no longer someone who has an occupation or simply says, quote, I am unleisurely in order to have leisure, but rather the goal, quote unquote, worker has become the entire identity of man. This new concept of the human person has disastrous implications, for with it, education is only valid if it peddles practical economic knowledge. Today, human life is dominated by the demands of this total work and the servile state. Man is unable to transcend his work schedule, and his work is devoid of meaning often. In the academy, ratio, discursive reason, practical problem solving, suppresses intellectus, deeper understanding, man's natural connection to the divine and the cosmos, and the result is a humanity that is often increasingly inhumane. Culture and the liberal arts. According to Pieper, we must establish, quote, a philosophical and theological concept of man. Pieper notes that these modern notions of work contradict the traditional understanding of education in the liberal arts, which originally recognized knowledge as something good in and of itself rather than something merely useful. The liberal arts, an expression coined by the Romans, originated in ancient Greece as paideia. For the Greeks, paideia was an all-encompassing term for their educational project of initiating a young person into their culture and way of being human, their tradition. Over time, paideia became synonymous with the very content of that culture, and thus Greek education could truly be defined in one word, enculturation, or in the Greek paideia. Already we can see how radically different this notion is from most contemporary Americans' pragmatic ideas of education. And yet, this is the heritage of the Western intellectual tradition. I would argue, my friends, it is our birthright. It is everyone's birthright. What is culture? The Greeks understood paideia as the way in which human beings found meaning and established their position in the universe. Paideia, culture and enculturation, helped the individual to see his or her place in the polis, the broader world, and creation or the cosmos. This created harmony as individuals ordered their lives to an objective heritage, to an objective reality. Classicists refer to this as cosmic piety. Today, many moderns view reality as subjective, something that each individual determines on his own. For example, the Supreme Court's famous majority opinion written by Justice Anthony Kennedy and Casey in 1992 asserted the counter-narrative to paideia. Quote, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life," end quote. This quote from the Supreme Court is the exact opposite of the entirety of the Western tradition, from Jerusalem to Athens to Rome and to Christendom. For Christian education, much like its Greco-Roman forebears, was about initiating a student into a culture, educating and forming the whole person, body and soul, into a rightly ordered human. The intellect, the will, and the passions working together in harmony with one another. The traditional approach, in fact, offers a properly useful education, honoring the dignity of all human persons, to cultivate informed and ordered person who is authentically free, for only a virtuous individual is able to fully participate in a free and ordered society. C.S. Lewis, in his famous work, The Abolition of Man, famously critiqued modern education as developing, quote, "men without chests," which seems like an odd expression until one learns that the foundation of the word virtue is the Latin word for vir, the Latin word vir, meaning man. For Lewis, a man without virtue is an incomplete man, a man, quote, "without a chest," so to speak. It is clear why the Romans called paideia both humanitas and the artes liberales, literally meaning, quote, literally meaning skills and knowledge for free individuals. For authentic freedom is found in ordering our existence according to our nature. A national crisis. The current crisis in American education is deeply unsettling. Generations of students have been robbed of their birthright and even malformed. To acknowledge that our common educational heritage is in disarray is likewise to acknowledge that our culture is under the threat of dissolution. Alan Bloom famously noted in The Closing of the American Mind, quote, "There is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says he or she believes. At the same time, it is that this hidden for decades in our schools has finally revealed itself such that regular Americans are beginning to pay more attention and even take action. It is an opportunity to reevaluate the system and reform. That said, it is worth noting that progressive ideologies and eroding academic standards were originally put in motion, built into the DNA of modern education by progressives in the early 20th century led by the father of modern American education, John Dewey. The controversial and divisive issues of the present day are the long-term logical consequences, I argue, of the philosophical and pedagogical reforms begun over a century ago in post-secondary departments of education. The pragmatist roots in our educational institutions are much deeper than most realize. Americans have for generations been subjugated to a progressive vision of education that is one of mere economic utility, and we now find ourselves in this moment ill-equipped to address the challenges posed by divisive ideologies about the human person, our history, and the value of our own culture and its forebears. True education is the key to reform. W.E.B. Du Bois was right. Du Bois was right. Only true education makes men and can help foster a free and virtuous society. The liberal arts tradition to which Du Bois refers has experienced a remarkable resurgence in the past 30 years in America, and the last decade has been marked by astonishing growth. What many call classical education is a reform movement that has brought about great hope and expansion throughout the entire country, and even internationally. Classical education aims to bring back the best of the tradition of paideia in a modern setting, and it has already shown its value in both qualitative and quantitative measures. According to a Manhattan Institute study, students attending classical schools vastly outpace their peers in traditional public schools in standardized testing and graduation rates, and these sorts of statistics can be found in diverse ethnic and socioeconomic communities. Likewise, Christian classical schools have even measured how a classical education offers many qualitative differences to modern progressive ed. For example, the Association of Classical Christian Schools has partnered with the University of Notre Dame's Sociology Department and found that classical Christian schools not only prepared students better for college than their counterparts, but also contributed significantly to a positive general outlook on life, gratitude, traditional values, and discipleship. In a recent survey of their 147 member schools, ICLE, the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, reported some impressive figures among Catholic schools that recently transitioned to the liberal arts. 78% of these schools reported increased enrollment, 56 reported a wait list in at least one grade, 81% reported standardized testing results the same or better, 82% report, quote, better or much better faculty morale and engagement, end quote. 85% found better student engagement, and 64% stated, quote, family and engagement in the life of faith was much better. In addition, traditional liberal arts colleges and universities have seen an enormous increase in enrollment and financial support from benefactors, coinciding with both the rapid decline in American public schools and the resurgence of classical education at the primary and secondary levels. To support this growing movement of homeschoolers, public charter schools, private schools, and religious classical schools, a wide array of institutes, think tanks, journals, and even a new classical standardized test have been established. There is much reason to hope as the classical liberal arts movement appears to keep growing from strength to strength. Classical education, formerly known in the West as education, is the only mode of learning by which young people can confidently meet the challenges of contemporary divisions and uncertainties with the perspective of our vast intellectual heritage. The writings of both Joseph Pieper and W.E.B. Du Bois offer a powerful alternative to the divisive ideologies from which we are suffering from progressive education, an opportunity to grasp onto a renewed vision that honors the dignity of all human persons and is a powerful and dynamic leaven with the potential to help heal our democratic republic. Seeing education as both culture and enculturation, as the Greeks and Romans did, is how Americans can join together under a common cause to help heal our society and ensure that it remains truly free. Nothing at this moment could be more useful. Thank you. At this time, I'd be happy to engage in conversation and take any questions. And thank you for listening to me read that.